Hello everybody. My name is Luz Maria Payan, and I am a second-year law student at Penn State Law. I am currently in the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For the lab's Witnesses to History project, we are capturing the personal experiences of women before and throughout a period of momentum in the fight for equal rights during a dynamic era in the United States. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Ms. Meg Salyer to join me today. She's a politician, a businesswoman, and an advocate. Thank you, Ms. Salyer, for joining me.
I'm delighted to be here, Luz. Thank you for asking.
Um, so to kind of get started with the interview, can you tell us when and where you were born?
Certainly, I was born on Long Island, New York, in a lovely little town called Stony Brook in June of 1955.
Okay, thank you. And did you have any siblings when you were growing up?
I do. I have one younger sister. Her name is Anne Braswell, and she's 6 years younger than I am.
Okay, perfect. So since she was younger than you, what was kind of that relationship with your sister like growing up?
Well, it was interesting because I actually left home to go to college when I was 17.
Oh,
And
wow.
so she was only 11.
Hmm.
And, we really weren't great friends at that point. That was a big age separation. And
Hmm.
it really wasn't until we became adults and I actually was able to take her on a wonderful, long, extended trip to Europe for her 21st birthday
Oh,
that
that's
we
amazing.
became a lot closer. And as adults, we spend a lot of time together now. But as children, we weren't quite as close.
Okay. Yeah, I can relate to that with my siblings. I think I'm a lot closer to them now than I was when we were younger. So were both of your parents in the home when you guys were growing up?
Yes. My mom and dad met right after college and were both in the home
Okay.
until
And
my mom passed away.
yeah. What was your dad working when you were growing up?
He was. My dad was an attorney for his entire professional life. He
Okay, nice.
practiced law for more than 50 years
Hmm.
as a sole practitioner in the state of New York.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what about your mom? Did she also work?
My mom worked before I was born. She was actually an editor of children's books at the publishing house named Scribner's in New York City. But when I was just 2 months old, my parents moved out to Long Island, and
Okay.
she gave up her career at that point. And she was a volunteer, which we'll probably talk about. She did lots of volunteer work in the community while I was growing up, but she did not have employment outside of the home.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing to hear that she was, editing children's books. I feel like that's such a fun thing to be able to do.
Oh, it was so exciting in New York at that time, and
Mhm.
she met so many famous authors, and Scribner's is continues to be one of the major
Mhm.
publishing houses, and they represented people like Hemingway and
Oh,
F.
wow.
Scott Fitzgerald, and she was an incredible reader, well over 1,000 words a minute with 80% comprehension when she was in college. And so this was the perfect job for her, and she really enjoyed it.
That's amazing. So considering your mom was, in the home when you were growing up, what kind of relationship did you have with her?
Well, I had a great relationship with her, except probably when I was a teenager. I think that's fairly common with daughters and their moms.
Mhm.
But my mother was extremely smart, and she was just a great role model for working in the community. She worked at our local hospital as, what they used to call a candy striper. She
Oh,
volunteered to run their thrift shop. She worked in the library. She and my dad were both involved with the local Rotary Club. And so it really set the tone for me that, living and being part of a community means giving back to the community and, demonstrates to me again that you get a lot more by giving than you do by not being involved.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I can see you with, your experience as being a councilwoman in Oklahoma that um how that influenced, your the trajectory in your life. So that's amazing to hear. In
Liz,
terms of,
I think it would be also important for this purpose to say that when I, graduated from college and my first job in New York was as a banker.
Mhm,
And I would sometimes come home and talk to my mom about why she never was back in the workforce.
mhm,
I felt sometimes frustrated that she had not used all of her talents,
mhm,
maybe to the fullest. And she was very clear that at that point in time, so this would have been, the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, that it would have reflected negatively on my dad that he hadn't been able to provide for our family had
mhm,
she had a job working outside of the house.
mhm.
That
That's
was
very interesting.
much more of a prevailing sentiment,
Mhm,
certainly, I say certainly, but maybe, maybe more so in some suburban communities,
mhm.
than in urban centers. But I was thinking about this morning, and really none of the moms of my friends had jobs outside of the home. And I never considered anything else, it just
Yeah.
is a different time.
Yeah, and I feel like that's very interesting to hear just because, you hear that, women had more domestic roles around that time, but I never really thought about the perspective of the husband. With that being said, did you ever talk to your dad about, what his thoughts were on your mom working?
Well, I think it went hand in glove. I always think that he was, very proud of her and of our family um, and proud of the fact that, he was able to provide a very good living and household for us. And we weren't ever wealthy, but we certainly had everything that we needed and, had the opportunity to travel. My grandparents, actually, his mom and stepdad lived in Mexico for 25 years
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
in Manzanillo. And so, we had the privilege of traveling there every other year for, at least the kids went every other year, but my parents went every year and, had great experiences doing that. But, it was a very traditional family lifestyle at
Mhm.
that time.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. I feel like that's just very interesting to kind of get like the inside perspective of, what was going on at that time. So thank you. I kind of want to shift our conversation into your childhood education. You were born in New York. Did you go to elementary and middle school and high school in New York as well?
I did. I went to public school all the way through high school. So I grew up in a community that was growing fairly quickly, and we had to move to different schools fairly frequently. But yeah, I went all the way from kindergarten. I actually went to preschool starting at age 3,
Oh,
and
wow.
then went to kindergarten. And because I was in public school, I was able to, um, when I got to be a sophomore and a junior in high school, I was able to double up on some of my classes. So I graduated at the end of my junior year,
Mhm.
graduated from high school a year early.
Okay, that's amazing. When you were talking about kind of having that support from your mom and just seeing her um do those editing with books and then staying at home, but your dad also working. Seeing your parents have that dynamic and just in general growing up, was there anything that you wanted to do when you were younger? Like, did you have a specific thing that you wanted to be when you were older?
Well, I didn't lose, but it was always made perfectly clear that I could do anything I wanted to do
Mm.
and to just, put my mind to really focusing on my education to begin with. Reading, as I've said earlier, reading was something that was just woven through our life.
Mhm.
And my mom modeled it, every day by, I think she probably read 2 books a day,
Wow.
every single day of the week. It meant she wasn't the best housekeeper in the whole world, but she did read a lot. And, you know, both my parents, so this again was a different time, but
Mhm.
both of my parents went to boarding school.
Okay.
My mom came from a family of very limited means.
Mhm.
And the only way that she was going to be able to go to college was by getting a scholarship to go to boarding school and then getting a scholarship to go to college. So
Mhm.
she graduated from Mount Holyoke College, which is one of the oldest women's colleges in the country. My
Wow.
dad, on the other hand, my dad's parents divorced when he was 7.
Mhm.
And so he went to boarding school at an earlier age, because it was just easier for his folks to manage. So he went to boarding school and then he went to Yale undergraduate
Mhm.
and went into the Navy. He was participated in the ROTC program at Yale Officer Candidate School, went into the Navy, and then using the GI Bill, he went to NYU Law School.
Mhm.
So both of them were highly educated and valued education. My on my mother's side of the family, almost all of the women went to Mount Holyoke. So there
Mhm.
wasn't really a lot of discussion as I was growing up about where I would go.
Mhm.
But there was a little twist with my graduating early. So essentially I had a gap year to do
Mhm.
something with. And instead of going to work, I went to school in Switzerland
Mhm.
for my freshman year of college.
Yeah, that was amazing. I know when I was looking at your LinkedIn, I did see that. And it's nice to hear that, both your parents were educated and you felt that empowerment from them to pursue higher education and that you felt supported. So thank you for sharing that with me. I really I think that's very important with, you know, just growing up having that support from parents. So thank you. And
Well,
I do
and I do think,
go ahead.
knowing your brother and knowing some of, my other youth council
Mhm.
students, that pressure is a little bit different when it's not the pattern of your family. I mean, my grandparents were college educated, my great grandparents were college educated, all went to, Ivy League schools. So it was the pattern of what was accepted, it was just an expected thing
Mhm.
where, I think it's so amazing and brave to be first time attendees of college and, take that opportunity for higher education to another level. And something that first time students should be so proud of.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with those sentiments, and I think it's a lot of pride that comes with, pursuing higher education and doing these things. I do want to talk about, your experiences in Switzerland and your college education. Before that, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about your high school kind of education, your high school life. When did you start high school?
And so I started high school in 1969.
Okay, and
Would
were
have
you
been my freshman year of high school.
okay, perfect. And were you still in New York? I think you mentioned that
Yeah,
earlier.
I was still on Long Island.
Okay.
I went to, it was called Ward Melville High School. And yeah, I had a great experience. I had, kids in my graduating class that I had gone all the way through kindergarten with, all the way up to high school. I was not very active in sports. That wasn't such a big thing as it is today. But I was involved with some language clubs. I think I was involved with the Spanish club. Spanish isn't very good these days, but I try hard. But yeah, I had a great experience and my teachers were, very helpful and, helped navigate this opportunity for me to take all of the coursework I needed to take and graduate a year early so that I could take advantage of another opportunity.
That's amazing that you had that support from your teachers. You mentioned a little bit earlier that you were involved in any sports. Was this just because there was no interest, or was there, difficulty in younger girls being involved in sports?
No, I don't think it was difficulty in women being involved, although Title IX really hadn't happened yet. It just was not an interest of mine.
Okay.
And so that wasn't, we had all the standard kinds of things. And in fact, in my day, we had to do PE. And, we had real gym classes as part of our curriculum. I think a lot of that stuff is being eliminated these days, but we did have regular gym classes. Some of the worst days of my high school career were when we had to do the pole vault or
Oh yeah.
the pommel horse or some
Yeah,
of those things. But
yeah.
we did also, I grew up on the beach.
Mhm.
So my sports were swimming and sailing and, things that we did more in the summertime, playing tennis.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Um, so you mentioned also that you had support from your teachers and stuff to be able to take the opportunities that you had, and I just kind of curious as to what were there women teachers or men teachers that were mostly the ones supporting you in your pursuit for your opportunities?
That's interesting. If I think about, you get asked who your favorite teacher was. I always sort of revert back to the fifth, sixth, and seventh grade, maybe as such formative years.
Mm.
And those were women teachers
Okay.
that I remember. Mrs. Pomponio was one of them. I also had, we had a very regular substitute teacher that used to work in our high school. And she's the person that taught me to love opera and love music so much. Um, so I do think that most of my teachers were women. And for whatever reason, this was, self-driven by myself, but I always took as many classes as I possibly could rather than as few classes as I possibly could. And, it seems there are probably two different people in the world, and some do, just what they have to do to get by.
Mm.
I didn't start my freshman year with this as a plan, but by the time I was, halfway through my sophomore year, I realized that I'd taken all of the classes I needed to take to graduate, with
Yeah.
the exception of you had to have 4 years of English. So
Mm.
in my junior year, I just doubled up on English and took 2 English classes plus, the other stuff. And that was the means by which I was able to graduate a year ahead.
Mm.
So I
That's
graduated
awesome.
from high school in 1972.
That's awesome. I think I'm also on that side where I take as many classes as I can. So
Yeah.
I can see that sentiment. Um, Going to the classes that you took, what were some of the electives that you were able to take?
Well, things weren't quite as fancy in those days. Although I do think that we had some AP classes. But because I, was working toward um, skipping an entire year, I
Mhm.
didn't take all that many electives. I took everything I had to in order to be able to graduate. And you will see that pattern happen again in college,
Yeah.
because I spent 2 of my 4 years of college in Europe. So when I
Okay.
was at Mount Holyoke, which is where my degree is from, I had to take, I just had the room to take every course that I had to take in order to graduate,
Mhm.
if that
Yeah,
makes any sense.
yeah, no,
It
that
was,
makes
it was
perfect
like a puzzle. My
sense.
2 years in Europe, I think you could argue, were all electives,
Oh.
as it was coursework that didn't necessarily go toward the courses I needed to take to graduate.
Mhm.
So that's one way, I guess, to review it.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that with me. Kind of before we step into, your year in Switzerland and also your time in undergrad, I know you mentioned that, excuse me, as you were growing up, there wasn't something that specifically called out to you as to what you wanted to do. When you were in high school, was that still the case, or was there something that kind of had formed in your mind?
Well, um, my dad had a very big influence on me, and he had a saying that goes back, very early in my memory, which is, as you look forward at your life, try to pick a lifestyle that you'd like to live, and then find a career or build a career that fits around that lifestyle. And he lived that with his law career.
Hmm.
He chose as a focus to work in the area of estate planning
Hmm.
and wills and trusts, and also real estate transactions. And I would describe those as, sort of a gentler practice of the law, as opposed to, say, criminal or complex corporate litigation that can be so intense and extremely time consuming and very necessarily focused on the timeline of the client that needs your help. Whereas, preparing estate documents and things were work that he could meet with a client during the day and develop their profile of wants and desires. And then he often, you know, um, would take off afternoons, and he would go back to the office after dinner in the evening. And in these days, use a dictation machine. He could dictate a will or a document that his secretary, again in those days, would have typed up and ready, on his desk the next morning.
Hmm.
So it gave him that flexibility to enjoy the outdoor sports that we did growing up. He played tennis and was a sailor and loved to go fishing. And so, I tried to look at that. It was a very early example for me of life work balance, and was deliberate. And so I think for a reasonable period of time, I probably thought I might go into the law. It seemed, even if I didn't practice, it does provide an incredibly good training in thought process and questioning and debating and looking at matters from lots of different perspectives. I have a huge respect for the law, but um, probably my experience in Switzerland and being independent and on my own away from home changed some of that. And I really wanted to see the world. And I think I knew early on that I didn't want to live in the same town in which I grew up and, take on or work with my dad in his practice. And I wanted to get out and make a name for myself.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really amazing. And you mentioned Switzerland, so I think that's the perfect time to, ask you a little bit about your experience in Switzerland. How did this opportunity arise to go to the Franklin University?
Yeah, well, it all came up very early when I was in kindergarten and first and second grade. My best friends were Swiss.
Okay.
Their dad had come to the United States from the German-speaking part of Switzerland, their mom and dad, and he was working at Brookhaven National Laboratory, which was a very big research center out in our community.
Mhm.
And so I became friends with these girls. My parents were very close friends with their family. And I think that just started an idea. My parents always thought it would be interesting for me to have that opposite exchange. You know, when the girls came to the United States, we couldn't communicate because they spoke Swiss German and I
Mm-hmm.
spoke English. By the time they left 4 years later, their Swiss German wasn't very good. And they went home really speaking English.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time we met, we were about 12 or 13, and we couldn't communicate again because they'd lost their English and I didn't speak Swiss German.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when I was in Switzerland and we were 18, and I could communicate a little with them in Italian or in French, and they could communicate back with me in English.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
so
wow.
that, sort of life experience was something that my mother and dad wanted me to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, it honestly happened over a tennis game. My mom was playing
Oh,
tennis with some folks and heard about this Franklin. At the time, it was called Franklin College.
okay.
It's located in Lugano, Switzerland, which is just north of the Italian border. But it's an American college. The classes were taught in English. It runs on an American calendar so that, we had breaks at Christmas time and we had, a break in the spring. And so I applied and was accepted. So literally at 17 years old, with no cell phone, no credit card, none of the things that you take you take for granted today.
Right. Mm-hmm.
None of those things. I got on an airplane with some other kids that I, didn't meet until we were at John F. Kennedy Airport, landed in Switzerland for a year of college.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a life-changing experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. And that's such a surreal thing to kind of experience. I know you mentioned that you didn't have a cell phone or credit card. You were only 17. How did you feel, moving across the world, in pursuit of, a higher education, leaving your family and everything back home?
Well, it was pretty scary, but I would say up to the point that I was sitting on the airplane. And once, I made that decision, and there were a bunch of other young people, just like I was,
Mhm.
um, it, it was just the next step. And there were a few times during the course of that year that, I found myself homesick or, a little bit lonely. And I honestly would look out the window at the beautiful Lake Lugano down below me, or take a walk through the woods and hear the bells of the Swiss cows ringing and think, what are you doing? Why would you be homesick or lonely, in this incredible place with this great opportunity?
Mhm.
And, I truly remember to this day, and I think it came home with me recently from my dad's house in a box, but I wrote a letter home and to my parents and said, I went to the grocery store today and I got everything I wanted in Italian. And I was so proud of myself. And it just, it gave you so much self-confidence that maybe, you weren't using the correct grammar, or you weren't, pronouncing the words exactly correctly, but they understood me and I did what I needed. And that was just the beginning of, you know, when you're in a foreign place or in a place that's, you're not used to, just problem solving is different. And uh, teamwork, and, when you travel, things just don't go the way you expect. Flights get canceled, or you miss a train, or how do you self-correct for those things? How do you get back and forth to school? How do just a lot, there was a lot of growing up in that first year. And I give so much credit to the faculty and the administration of the school. They were very young. This college was just 5 years old. And
Oh,
so
wow.
they were also learning,
Hmm.
how to manage a group of 200 young people, maybe 60% of whom were American, and the other 40% were from all over the rest of the world, and how to, navigate everything from finding us housing. I lived up on top of a mountain away from campus and hitchhiked most days to school because there was just one road that went up to the top of the mountain, and it was just a great experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with me. I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that when you were on the plane to head over to Switzerland, there was some other students that were also going for that reason. Did you know these students at all?
Oh, I didn't know anybody,
Mm.
but so the day we arrived, we flew from New York City to Zurich. I got on the train and sat next to a young girl from California, whose name is Cindy. When we were at JFK Airport, there was a girl that happened to have a animal carrier with her. My little sister was at the airport with us, and she was so curious, about what was in that carrier. We'd always had cats, and she was so curious. So I met this girl and found out it was a big black cat called Anthracite.
Oh.
And if you can believe this, those are my two best friends in the world to today.
Oh, that's amazing.
One lives in California, one lives in Florida. And last Christmas, the three of us were together at my house in California, each one of us with at least one of our daughters, and one of their daughters had her grandbaby with her.
Oh, that's so
And
amazing.
that is 50 years later.
Yeah,
So we
that's
met on the
amazing.
first day we lived together. We lived in a house up in the mountains together all that year. We came back to the US, and I went to Mount Holyoke, as I said, and my friend, my roommate Cindy, went to Berkeley in San Francisco. We went back to Europe our junior year, and Cindy spent a year in Paris, and I did a semester in Brussels and a semester in London, and then went back as seniors. She went back to Berkeley, and I went back and graduated from Mount Holyoke. And then we lived together in New York City, working, and it's just, it's been interesting, but those friendships have lasted for 50 full years.
Yeah, that's really amazing, and it's so exciting to hear that, you were able to live with your friend Cindy and just kind of experience life with both of them in a
Yeah.
different country. So thank you for sharing that. That's really amazing. Do you think, having them in Switzerland just kind of made the experience better in terms of just being over there?
I think anytime a group of people goes through kind of accelerated and dramatic life change, it quickly builds deeper friendships.
Hmm.
And, I think I could say with 100% certainty that if I ran into, and I do from time to time, run into anybody that was there at the same time I was in my class or was there, a year before, that we go back to the friendship that we had in college.
Yeah.
It's that close and that lasting because we had such, experiences together. I don't do a lot of social media, but I was looking for somebody on Facebook the other day. Actually, you know how it pops up and says somebody you may know.
Yeah.
So I clicked on that and asked to be a friend. And I got an immediate message back on Messenger that said, we've been friends so much longer than Facebook has even existed. We don't need this to be friends, but, he did accept my friend request. So, that's the kind of relationship that I think those experiences create. Kind
Hmm.
of like your law school class.
Oh, yeah,
You're
for
going
sure.
through a lot of change and a lot of stress, and you will be friends with that group, your cohort, for your life.
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know my friends and I are always talking about 10 years from now when we're not here anymore. We get really emotional, but I think that goes to what you're saying, that those really big life changes and experiences really just bond you for life.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And,
thank
and then you have to work at it.
yeah, yeah.
Then you have to make sure that you find, those opportunities to bump back into each other.
Mhm.
Uh, But yeah, those bonds are so important.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of before we go and kind of discuss your time in undergrad, I kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about Switzerland. I know you mentioned that while it was in Switzerland, it was kind of an American school. So I'm curious as to if you kind of noticed any similarities in just being in the United States and in New York in your education and kind of how that influenced your studies in Switzerland.
Well, if I understand that, let me try to answer this way. It definitely was a completely different experience.
Mhm.
I mean, I grew up, when we say New York, people listening to this or seeing this may think, New York City, and that is not the case. While New York City, I went to all the time, I grew up in a small village
Mhm.
where, I walked to school, my dad could walk to the office. We lived in a little house that actually was built as the first church
Oh,
in
wow.
my little town of Stony Brook in the late 1600s.
Wow.
1840, it was moved across the street by horse and buggy, and it was converted into a home for a sea captain that was a whaler of all things. And so, it was a little village with tons of history and so very, very different for
Mhm.
being in the middle of Europe. And, well, our country is a couple of 100 years old. Europe is centuries and centuries old and fabulous architecture. And, it was the first place that I really began to understand about placemaking and
Mhm.
how town squares or piazzas where people gather make a difference, or promenades along a lakefront, or just how the built environment and influences the way you live and the way you feel, and how it can be beautiful and good and safe, or it can not be all those things. And
Mhm.
so the philosophy of the school, I think, is really important also in my development, because most programs abroad happen in somebody's junior year. And typically by that time, at least now, you've already decided what your major is going to be, and you're pretty well locked into the kind of courses you need to take.
Mhm.
By going as a freshman, and going without any really preconceived idea of what I wanted to do with my undergraduate education, I just selected a bunch of classes that I was interested in.
Mhm.
And the school's idea was to build kind of an experiential learning program, so that if you were studying about ancient Greece and Rome, during that semester, you would travel with a professor to
Oh, wow.
Greece, and you would spend 2 weeks seeing and traveling to what you were learning about. And then you would come back to campus and have to write a research paper
Mhm.
based on your academic travel. And we did that once each semester. So it sounds kind of funny for me to say I was required to go to Northern Italy, or Northern Africa, and I was required to go to Greece and Turkey. But that was part of the philosophy, that it's easier and more impactful to learn when you're seeing what it is you're learning.
Mhm.
And I totally agree with that. It was just amazing. So I had a chance to go to the Soviet Union in 1972
Wow.
while the Berlin Wall was obviously still standing. While we had to go through Checkpoint Charlie, while we were being spied on, by people in the hotel.
Mhm.
I just, had a chance to do so many interesting, exciting things, some of which were probably, a little on the edge, but, you know, all of which helped, help lay a foundation for being curious. And
Mhm.
so I ended up, uh, so I took things like Islamic history for a year,
Wow.
ancient Mediterranean civilization, and then something that was called developmental economics. So it was really looking at the third world countries and how we can use economic development principles to bring them along. And that um, did exactly what the college thought it might, which was spur my interest in economics and political science.
Hmm.
So I ended up following that kind of a track throughout my undergraduate career. And the semester I did in London was built around British politics.
Oh, wow.
And this semester in Brussels was really built around developmental economics.
Hmm.
And so my degree from Mount Holyoke is in political science with a minor in economics. And that was how I ended up going into banking.
Hmm.
But
Thank you.
that thread all happened because I took a weird course that I didn't know anything about and, found it to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I just think it's fascinating to see how just like one little decision in our lives can affect the trajectory of all of the decisions that we make.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's why we have to keep trying stuff, keep learning,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
never know what door that next step is going to open.
100%. So
Yeah.
kind of shifting into your time studying political science and economics during undergrad. What year did you start undergrad?
I started undergrad in 1970, the fall of 1972.
Okay. And can you remind me what was the name of your college that you went to?
Yeah, so the college I graduated from was called Mount Holyoke.
Okay.
And it's one of what used to be called the Seven Sisters colleges.
Okay.
So you have the Ivy League schools like Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Columbia. The Smith, Mount Holyoke, Radcliffe were the women's versions of
Oh,
those
interesting.
Ivy League schools. So Mount Holyoke dates back to about 1876 or 78,
Hmm.
was its founding. And that makes it either the oldest or the second oldest women's college in the country.
Wow, that's really amazing. Was it still a women's college when you were there?
Yeah, and it is still a women's college
Oh,
today.
okay.
It's one of the very few all women's colleges that still exist. Although they did when I was there, they admitted a couple of guys. So we were actually in Western Massachusetts in the same valley
Hmm.
with Smith College, which was also women, Amherst, which was co-ed, University of Massachusetts, which was co-ed, and Hampshire College.
Hmm.
And we were all within about 20 minutes of each other's campuses. So they used to run a bus route and you could actually take classes at any of the five colleges.
Oh, wow.
So I think there were 9 men that were official students of Mount Holyoke when I was there, but I took classes at Amherst and, you could go back and forth. So, but it is still all women to this day
Yeah.
and
Wow,
very proud of that.
yeah, it's really amazing to hear. I did not, I knew it was a women's college. I didn't know it was still today. So thank you for sharing that. So I know you mentioned that, your time in Switzerland kind of influenced your decision to study political science and economics. What kind of classes were you able to take while you were at Mount Holyoke?
Well, a lot of the same. They had a very strong political science department with some real thought leaders. And I did a lot of world politics. And I'm not sure I can run through courses for you, Luce, but
That's fine.
um, I was very engaged in the political science
Mhm.
department. But again, remember that I only spent 2 years there. So I had to take every required course for graduation, basically while I was there. The good
Mhm.
news is, when I went the first year, I did Switzerland the first year. Mount Holyoke accepted all of my credits
Oh,
for
wow.
that year. So I entered as a sophomore.
That's
So
amazing.
I had to basically do 2 of my last 3 years
Mhm.
of advanced work at Mount Holyoke.
Yeah, that's amazing. So considering this was a women's college, in terms of professors, did you have male professors or was it only women professors that
No,
you had?
we had male professors as well.
Okay, cool. And um, I know, when I was in undergrad, there was a growing kind of department of women's and gender studies.
Yeah.
Were these classes that you were able to take as well in Mount Holyoke?
Yes, and so let me say, I think that's an interesting point. Um, this college has a very, very long history, and the original philosophy probably would have been, or was, um, that women, in a uh, single gender environment would be able to focus more on their studies than being worried about, am I dressed correctly to go to class? Did I get makeup on this morning? Did I, not having to necessarily, and I don't really believe in this, but not necessarily have to compete, against the guys in my class. Am I being intimidated? Am I not going to answer questions? So it was really designed to give women a voice, a safe place for their voice. By the time I attended, I would say 50% of the women that were there went there to get a great education.
Mhm.
And the other 50% went there very specifically because it was a women's college and
Okay.
were really interested in gender studies programming and classes and women's specific issues and
Mhm.
that sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
no, it
it
does.
was really, with the times,
Mhm.
it was evolving into, I would even say more of an activist
Okay.
university. But again, half of the people there, including myself, went because it's one of the best universities
Mhm.
in the country. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't go because it was a woman's college.
Mhm.
So, there were both of those things happening. And I think today it's probably 80 or 90% go because it's one of the few remaining women's colleges.
Mhm.
And it is very much a voice about women's rights and women's equality and
Mhm.
women's studies.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I didn't realize kind of the divide in terms of people's reasonings for going there. So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious as to what kind of organizations were there. I know you mentioned that there was a rise in, the fight for equality for women. What kind
Mhm.
of organizations were in Mount Holyoke that kind of went towards that goal?
Well, everything that you can imagine that, would be programming or would be areas of
Mhm.
interest. Lots of, clubs that were, talking about equality.
Mhm.
Obvious sports issues were addressed.
Mhm.
The full spectrum of issues that were coming to the forefront at
Mhm.
that time in women's issues and women's rights and women's equality, and those things were all represented on the campus. It was the birthplace of some of those things. And, remember that this is in 1972 to 1976. We were coming off the late 60s, lots of protests.
Mhm.
We protested the Vietnam War in a big way, and it was a very activist time, and women's rights were elevating to the forefront of a lot of those issues, and Mount Holyoke was the home base for a lot of those things.
Yeah, that's amazing. In terms of, you mentioned the specific time frame of when you were an undergrad at Mount Holyoke, and I know that um, in 64 with the Civil Rights Act, Title VII was passed, affording women equality in the workplace. And then in 1972, I believe it was Title IX. Considering, this was a women's school, did you have conversations with either your professors or colleagues about the enactment of these laws in the fight for women's equality?
There would have been seminars and classes and full courses and degrees in
Yeah.
those subject matters.
Mhm. Yeah, that's amazing to hear. I feel like a lot of times it's just general discussions, but it's really interesting to hear that there was so many opportunities to be able to learn more, hear more, provide your own opinions about those things. So that's really amazing.
Absolutely. But I do want to say for myself personally, I I never I have really never felt disadvantaged, in any way, and never felt that there wasn't anything that I couldn't do.
Mhm.
So uh, my focus was just to figure out what it is you wanted to do and go reach for it, get
Mhm.
it done, and not assume or not feel like you were going to be limited because of your gender.
Mhm.
That
Yeah, of course.
that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And when my first job out of college was as a banker in New York City, there weren't all that many of us.
Mhm.
And but doors were just beginning to open. I really did have a great window. The generation of women that came just before me were the ones that really had to fight hard.
Mhm.
And we were the beneficiaries of a lot of these changes that made it more accessible
Mhm.
and easier to advance forward through that type of a career.
Yeah, of course. And I'm glad that you had those experiences where you felt like, you could do anything. You mentioned, working in the banking kind of um area. So you said you did that right after college?
Yep, that was my very first job. I worked for Chase Manhattan Bank in New York, and they actually came onto the campus at Mount Holyoke in the spring before graduation and interviewed, as did lots of the other major corporations and major financial institutions. And if you were lucky enough to get an interview and lucky enough to get invited to New York City, then we did another day of interviews. And so I knew I had my job before I graduated.
That's amazing. I know that's
Just
one of
like
the
you.
yeah.
You
Hopefully.
hope you know you'll have a job before you
Yeah.
graduate.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Um,
Absolutely.
so you mentioned that when you entered this kind of banking, there weren't a lot of women in that. But did you feel that you were supported and that you were able? I know you mentioned that you always felt that you could do anything. Did that kind of continue as you went into your first job after college?
I did feel like I was supported. As I said, there was a group of women that had come before me that had begun to advance, up the management ladders. And so there were some really great role models. And by the time so I was hired by Chase to go through a training program to
Mhm.
start with. So we did really 6 months of classroom work and then worked as a credit analyst for another 6 or 7 months before we actually had a job placement. And I would guess that probably a third of my classmates were women.
Okay.
So, and today I would bet that would be more than half.
Mhm.
But, we were getting there. We were making
Yeah, of course.
strides.
Yeah, little by little. That's what
Yeah.
matters. Um,
And, I felt like I had every opportunity. I traveled representing the bank, and I went to work there when I was 21 years old. Really, I just was turning 22 because of that, early graduation from high school. So I graduated from college when I was just 20
Mhm.
and went to work for the bank when I had just turned 21. And so I had amazing opportunities, but I had also incredible bosses, most of whom were men who
Mhm.
were very, pro seeing women advance in that career and were very supportive. Um, Also cognizant that there could be issues,
Right.
you know, more likely to happen external to the bank,
Mhm.
possibly with a client or, who was less favorable about having a young woman banker than they might have been comfortable having a young man as their banker,
Mhm.
or, might decide at dinner some night to tell inappropriate jokes, or, how do you handle that kind of thing? But those were the, if there were bumps, those were the kinds of, things that could be a little bit awkward. And
Mhm.
those things
Yeah.
continue to happen today.
Right, of course. If you
Yeah.
don't mind me asking, did you ever experience any of those little bumps, not from your bosses, but from the people that you worked with as you were working at?
Yeah, not so much that I worked with, but I did certainly have some of those bumps
Mm.
where, conversations or comments or things might have been inappropriate,
Yeah. Hmm.
or that we would consider inappropriate today, for sure.
Yeah, because
But
back then probably not inappropriate with those people.
the world has really changed.
Yeah.
And
And
it was different. I would say it was also, different for some of the middle management types at the bank. Um, at a bank, it could be any bank, but that would have not been used to having young women in the workforce,
Mhm.
and their learning curves in all those things.
Mhm.
We've got maybe 5 different generations of people working together. Even if you would completely exclude gender from the conversation, we don't all communicate the same way,
Right.
right? We either verbally or non-verbally.
Mhm.
Um, we just are different from one another. And when you get I don't know what I am, I'm an old generation, when you get me working with, I don't even know what you're calling them, this, somebody that's 20,
Mhm.
we have very different styles
Mhm.
of doing things and of communication and, of work ethic, and neither good nor bad, just different. And
Mhm.
so, that was a time in the workforce when there was a flood of young professional women coming into the workforce, and it took some adjustment
Mhm.
for people just to learn how to communicate.
Right. And I'm glad that, at least in your first job outside of undergrad, you had that support from your supervisors and bosses that were able to
Yeah.
kind of make that adjustment. So how long did you stay at that first job at the bank?
I stayed at my first job from 1976 until 1982.
Okay. And then after in 1982, what did you do?
Yeah, so I left the bank and ended up going to work for a private investment banking firm in New York City that specialized in foreign currency transactions. The principal of the firm advised Fortune 500 companies primarily on movements in foreign exchange. And we published a weekly newsletter that talked about forecasts in rate exchanges. And we worked on what today would be called derivatives, early derivatives, where we were doing foreign currency, primarily Swiss franc swaps for floating rate US dollar denominated debt so that you could create lower fixed rate
Yeah.
debt, companies that were struggling with floating rate debt.
Mhm.
So it was a very interesting experience. And I ended up then becoming engaged and moving to Oklahoma City. And I went to work for an independent oil and gas operator that was based out of Oklahoma City, helping to raise money for limited partnership drilling funds.
Okay.
And then moved on to a couple of other things. So
Yeah. So, before we get to those other things that I do want to talk to you about, did you move to Oklahoma because your partner was from Oklahoma?
yes. So when I got married, I wasn't, I sort of had my own identity
Hmm.
here already. I
That's
didn't
nice.
just come as a wife, and
Hmm.
that was helpful.
Yeah, I can imagine how helpful it is. Did you have kids with your partner?
Yes, we have one daughter.
And I guess, we talked a little bit earlier about your relationship with your parents and how your relationship with your sister, you guys got closer as you got older. How is your relationship with your daughter now?
Yeah, with my daughter, it's great. She's 36. I almost can't say that out loud. She's a young adult and lives here in Oklahoma City. And she's got my sister has one daughter.
Mhm.
So, she's got a cousin that's close to her same age. And she was born and raised in Oklahoma City, um, went to Westminster School, and then went to Cassidy for high school. But drum roll, she went to school in Switzerland for all 4 years of college.
Oh,
She went
wow.
to my same
Amazing.
school and did all 4 years in Switzerland. So she figured out how to work the system better than I did. And had a great experience and came back home and worked for a international oil and gas company for a while. And so, yeah, she's also had a great experience doing that multicultural thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know you said she was able to work the system better than you did, but I think, having you and having, her mom gone to that same school, um I know you must be proud and she was probably very grateful to have that connection with you as well.
Well, I was very proud. I don't know about your, situation with your parents so much, but when I encouraged her to go to school in Switzerland, the first thought was, no way. That's where my mom went. So, why would I want to do that?
Mhm.
And the school was very clever, and she did apply and was accepted. And so they offered the students during their senior high school year to
Mhm.
go over for spring break and
Oh,
check out the campus and stay in one of the dorms for a couple of nights and meet
wow.
some of the students. And I can't believe, Lise, that I actually got her to come home. I didn't think she was going to come home and graduate. Once she saw it and had the experience, she could not get back there faster.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
if she could figure out how to go to school at 36, she would be back there tomorrow. It
Oh,
was just a great experience and, similar friendships for her that I have. And,
yeah.
for Margaret, that's now, um, 15 years ago,
Mhm.
and they still all stay in touch. So it's
Yeah.
a really neat thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just hearing your own experience with it, I can only imagine the experiences she had for 4 years over there. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and that's an interesting thing for you to say. This was my own, maybe some of my lack of experience when I had that opportunity, but I had such an amazing year the first year. I was afraid to go back because I couldn't, think about how the experience could be any better
Mm.
or any more. And the students that actually stayed for that second year just have shared with me over time how much deeper, and richer that second year was because, you kind of had your feet planted. Not everything was just, wide-eyed new.
Mhm.
Really, you had some of the mechanics down. And so
Yeah.
that second year was better. And but that was just my choice. But
Right.
but she did really have a very rich, very great experience.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, so I kind of want to talk now about your time as a councilwoman of Ward 6 of Oklahoma. Um, so what kind of motivated your decision to become councilwoman?
Well, very good question, because I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined that I would have ended up running for an elected office and
Mhm.
serving on the city council. Politics, I would consider myself almost as apolitical as possible. And I didn't consider that job to be political. I
Mhm.
think, serving on something like a school board or a city council where you're directly connected to your constituents
Mhm.
is much more about community service than it is about politics.
Mhm.
And, for many people wouldn't know this, but for the Oklahoma City Council, you don't run on a political ticket. You run as a nonpartisan
Mm.
candidate, and you don't identify when you run for election. You don't identify as a political party.
Mhm.
So I bet I still have colleagues today that would not know what my party affiliation is, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Certainly with regard to serving the city,
Mhm.
because we're going to pick up your trash, we're going to fill your potholes, we're going to provide water service, whoever you are, wherever you are. It doesn't make any difference. The services that we provide police service, we provide infrastructure. That happens for anybody and everybody that lives within the Oklahoma City limits,
Mhm.
regardless. So getting politics involved at the city council level, is really is not a good thing for me. So
Mhm.
um, I started being engaged as a community volunteer as soon as I moved to Oklahoma City, and got involved with organizations like the Junior League.
Mhm.
I got involved with what used to be called the Women's Committee of the Symphony Orchestra, and today is called the Orchestra League, and is men and women
Yeah.
involved in supporting the symphony. Um, I got involved in Leadership Oklahoma City,
Mhm.
which is just a fantastic networking program and really, brings you behind the scenes of all of the things happening in Oklahoma City, from um, education and healthcare and cultural affairs and police and public safety. You spend a day a month working on sessions around each of those things, and you build a huge network of people. We have expanded that program to include a youth council, which is how I met your brother, to a loyal program that's for young professionals it's called Loyal, for linking Oklahoma's young adult leaders.
Mhm.
And those young people learn about community service and do a project in the community. I did Leadership Oklahoma City, and then got involved. I guess it's kind of important to say that a lot of my business and investment was in downtown Oklahoma City, right near the site 30 years ago of the Oklahoma City bombing. Um, that had a life altering change for everybody in this community. We celebrate on Saturday the 19th, 30 years
Mhm.
of um, lives lost and lives forever changed because of that event. And I began to work right after that on helping to rebuild the downtown community, and actually created a project called Automobile Alley, created a district. It's called the Automobile Alley Main Street program, got very involved with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And so through all of those interactions, I became friends with and acquainted with a lot of people at City Hall, a lot of people that were involved in city politics. And so the seat came open in November of 2008. My predecessor name was Ann Simak, and she had served for 13 years. Her son became a firefighter, and they couldn't both work for the city of Oklahoma City. So she gave up about 2.5 years of her term. So
Mhm.
I was approached by the mayor at the time and some city leadership to see if I was interested or would be willing to run. My daughter Margaret was still in high school, and I thought, no, I'm running a business and I'm busy, and I really don't have time. And I waited and waited until the day before filing. And I actually went up to Stillwater with some friends of mine to go to a football game. And all the way up in the car and all the way back in the car, they just said, this is what you do. You're a volunteer in the community, and this is an opportunity for 2.5 years to just try to take it to the next level. And I thought to myself that anybody could do anything for 2.5 years, even if you hated it, it would be the opportunity to try. So on filing day, I went down to the registrar's office and I signed up to run, shocked everybody that I told, but I did it. And I won that first campaign, and so served for 2.5 years. And then I was reelected for 2 additional 4-year terms. So I served Ward 6 for a total of 10.5 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing all, your experience in the community, leading up to your decision to be in city council. I think what you mentioned earlier about this position being a community service position, I think that translates into your work that you've done before and during your time. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that was the path. It was not planned or intended or, something that I really, other than doing the work in the community, it wasn't anything that I really had prepared for. But I think that, being a business owner, making payroll, having to make decisions, working with volunteer teams of people, having been in the real estate business myself, dealing then with city issues of zoning and permitting and, those things. I had a little bit of experience, at least to
Mhm.
get started.
Yeah. Did you have any difficulties in engaging the community in Ward 6 during your time as councilwoman?
Well, that's a really broad and really deep question. So maybe let's start by this, because you referenced the economic inequality.
Mhm.
It is Ward 6. So for anybody that would not know this, obviously, but Ward 6 is dead center in the middle of Oklahoma City. And it straddles near North Oklahoma City with near South Oklahoma City. And there has always been a bit of a dividing line, whether it be the river or the railroad tracks, that separated those two communities, as is often the case. Ward 6 was also the smallest ward, but it was the most densely populated. And it was absolutely 50-50 Hispanic and Caucasian. It had two very diverse communities. I had most of the historic neighborhoods, and a lot of those that were designated as historic preservation neighborhoods. So Heritage Hills, Mesta Park, Crestwood, Gatewood, not that they were all Heritage Hills with big mansions, but they were, lots of historic homes and traditional neighborhoods. Then I had Capitol Hill, which is today a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood.
Mhm.
Now, also not singularly homogeneous, because it's Mexican, it's Guatemalan, it's Peruvian, it's El Salvadorian, but primarily Hispanic families
Mhm.
that are hardworking, small business owners, probably living a more difficult economic situation than some of the older North neighborhoods.
Mhm.
So communicating with everybody was hard. And I found the best way for me to do that was to use my network in the Hispanic community. And people like Brenda and Jorge Hernandez that became great friends of mine. And, we began to just build on that and have town meetings and try to do as much of my literature as I could in Spanish to, try to encourage involvement from South Ward 6 of
Mhm.
people in a lot of those networking programs. I worked with the Hispanic Chamber, uh, David, who I just completely lost his last name, but that David Castillo, who is head of the Hispanic Chamber. We worked with the business owners along Southwest 29th Street. We worked really hard to put together Calle dos Cinco on 25th Street
Mhm.
and create a Main Street program. Gloria Torres, was running that for a long time. So, you tried to use the community to outreach to address the same kinds of things that we were addressing in North Oklahoma City.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really amazing. Thank you for kind of sharing how you did that. And I know I experienced some of your work. I went to Calle dos Cinco, the festival, a lot of times in high school and in undergrad as well. Um, so thank
The very, very first um, campaign event that I ever did was Fiesta de las Americas
Oh, I
and
love this.
their parade, which was so much fun. And I went with a fellow that was a state senator at the time, a guy named Al McCaffrey. I had never done anything like this before, and he took me, by the hand down 25th Street, just going out, shaking hands, saying, I'm Meg and I'm running for council. And then, being able to have youth council members that were all part of that community.
Mhm.
I got to know them and I got to know their families. And I was a tutor at Heronville Elementary School. So I had a bunch of little ones, that I worked with. And Ramiro at La Oaxaqueña was a big help. Brenda had a fantastic group of women leaders that all helped me on all of my campaigns. I still see Pilar and, just tons of them around the community. It's great.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you've had such a fruitful life and a career of service. What are you doing now?
Well, so now I continue to manage some real estate that I own in Oklahoma City. I continue to serve the city as an arts commissioner appointed by the mayor. I'm currently the co-chair of the Oklahoma City Festival of the Arts, which is our, huge community arts festival. It happens in the end of June. I serve on two additional corporate boards. And I just do a lot of volunteer work.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's amazing.
still staying engaged.
Yeah, I was gonna say I love to see that you're still engaged in the community and doing such important work in Oklahoma. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Well, Luce, the thing that, the one big kernel that I've learned over all these years, and it's not new, but I've just found it to be so true, is you can pretty much live anywhere.
Mm.
You can live and you can have a job but if you want to make a life and really be fulfilled by where you are, giving back to your community is what makes a difference. And Oklahoma City is a really unique place where you don't have to have a specific last name. You don't have to have come, from a background of wealth or significance. If you are interested in a subject, you care about a cause, And it could be children, it could be education, it could be the arts, it could be the environment, you know, any range of things. There are places and organizations that need your help.
Hmm.
And you really just have to show up. You have to show up and you have to do the work. You have to be willing to roll up your sleeves.
Right.
But if you're willing to do that, there's community here for you. And I feel so blessed that by chance, I got a phone call one day that said, that trip you're planning to Seattle, well, you need to cancel it and you're going to Oklahoma City. And I at first couldn't figure out who I'd made mad or why I had to make that change. And I'm so grateful that I landed in this, incredible community that provides these opportunities. And we're sure not perfect, but I think we've come a long, long way in addressing some of the issues of inequality that I contend are far more or far deeper than just gender. Uh,
Hmm.
Areas that really need to be addressed, but I think we're making a lot of headway in Oklahoma City proper. The state is elevating itself to some other complications, but at the city level, I think our leadership's been fantastic. The cooperation between, the mayors that we've had, the business community, and the
Hmm.
business leadership is all there. And
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that. Kind of reflecting, on your life and everything that we discussed on this interview. We started out this interview with me describing you as a politician, a businesswoman, and an advocate. I know you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but how would you describe yourself?
well, I would probably describe myself as a citizen of a fabulous community that hopes a legacy will be some of the ways I've been able to work in teams with others to improve the quality of life for people that live and visit this wonderful place.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And then my last question for you today, Meg, is looking back at all that you've experienced and achieved, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
That I was willing to take a lot of risks. Um, sometimes not sometimes, I think it always takes getting out of your comfort zone to experience, real change and to begin to develop a self-confidence that then, helps you grow above and above that. So I think, being able to take some risks early on and being encouraged to do so by my support network is what I've been able to build on over the years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's such an important thing as well. So that does conclude my questions. Thank you so much for your willingness to share your experiences and everything that you've achieved. I really do believe that your insight and everything that you've shared with us will have a lasting insight on our project and will be able to, inspire other students. So thank you so much for your
I hope so.
participation.
And thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.